Locked On Blues, your daily podcast on the St. Louis Blues. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the Locked On Blues podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, and your number one source for daily Blues content. I'm your host, Josh Hyman.
And I'm Thomas Welch.
And we got I would call it a fun episode, but it's not going to be too fun for Tommy and I. We got an episode full of challenging conversations that need to be had. We're going to spend a lot of time talking about the sort of the transition of the St. Louis Blues, from the older core into the younger core. And as much as that's been fun this year, with that comes some difficult decisions that are going to need to be made down the road of who do you stick with, who do you keep around, and who do you part ways with. And that could lead to guys like David Perron moving on from the St. Louis Blues. Or if they wanted to stick with the older guys, it could be a guy like Ville Husso moving on from the St. Louis Blues. Or, believe it or not, maybe the most popular guy on this podcast lately, Ivan Barbashev, with a contract expiring next season. So definitely a lot of question marks surrounding what the Blues are going to do in terms of, their core moving forward and big decisions to be made in this upcoming offseason and the one after that. So we're going to be getting into all of that and more. But first, want to thank anyone and everyone out there who's making Locked On Blues your first listen every day. We are free and available on all platforms. All right, Tommy. So we got into this a little bit last episode at the end, or maybe it was 2 episodes ago. I don't remember. Ville Husso is a guy that has been playing above what was expected of him this season and has been a really solid piece for the St. Louis Blues and really has, helped their record a lot this year with Jordan Binnington, being injured and having COVID and just being a little inconsistent here and there. One guy that's really, come in to save the day is Ville Husso. Was maybe the weakest link, close to one of the weakest links of the team last season, and then turns around and is one of the strongest players on the team this year. That being said, there's been a lot of talk about whether or not the Blues should sell high on Ville Husso and say, hey, look, we got, Jordan Binnington as our long-term starter. We got another young guy in Ville Husso. A lot of teams out there in the market for a starting goalie. Does it make sense to move on from Ville Husso while he is playing the best hockey of his career with the assumption that this is the most you could ever get back for him in a trade?
I think it does, Josh. I think there's a lot of things that go into this, obviously. And one of them, as we talked about on last podcast, I think, is Ville Husso's inconsistency. So over the course of his career, he's kind of been up and down in terms of save percentage. Like one season, like we're looking at right now, he's 10 games in, and he's got a .933 save percentage, right? As opposed to last year, where I think he played 17 games and he had a save percentage below 900. So it's very, like I said on the last podcast, you get the highs and the lows and not a whole lot of in between with Ville Husso. And when it comes to a starter in the NHL at the goalie position, I feel like you want a guy that's more even keel. I mean, that's kind of one of the reasons that Blues fans ran Jake Allen out of town, right? I mean, that's a harsh way of saying it, I feel like, but it's kind of what happened. The fans weren't happy. Like, the performance against Minnesota in the playoffs was top-notch Jake Allen, some of the best we've ever seen. And at times, we saw that as well with paddle saves and highlight reel saves. And other times, it wasn't anywhere close. And it was the woes of December going into January. I feel like that was always the months that he struggled with that transition. So I don't want to count my chickens before they're hatched, but I would not be surprised to see Ville Husso go down a similar road solely based off of his historical statistics. Jordan Binnington, the last 3 seasons, as unimpressed as most Blues fans have been with him, he's hovered right around a 910 save percentage in all of them. I think it was 912, 910, and 906 this season. So that's not even counting the Stanley Cup run where he had a 927 save percentage. So if you're looking for consistency, Jordan Binnington is that guy, even if he's consistently trending downward. I think this season he still has time to bounce back, and I think having Ville Husso in the fold will help him there and push him to be a better version of himself. But at the same time, Ville Husso is going to be a free agent after this season. The Blues probably aren't going to be looking to sign him because I'm assuming he would probably want to sign somewhere else and start. And two, I don't know if the Blues have the cap space to send at the lowest probably 2.5 mil on a backup goalie when they're paying Binnington 6 already. So like I said, there's a lot of variables at play here. I agree 1,000% with the idea of riding the hot hand and giving Ville Husso more starts right now. But I would not be surprised, and I would actually encourage a Ville Husso trade before the deadline.
Yeah, it's definitely a double-edged sword. It's nice to have a really good backup goalie that has some youth to him and has a cheap contract. Like, that is a dream in the NHL. But the flip side of that is, you would hate to lose him for nothing. You would hate to just, have him go thrive somewhere else. And you could have maybe made him the centerpiece of a trade that improves your team in the long term. But the flip side of that is he's been very important for the St. Louis Blues this year, whether it's been when Binnington's been out or when Binnington just hasn't been playing his best. Like, as we've seen lately, Craig Ruby's going to a rotation, which basically means they're going to a bit of a 1A, 1B situation. And I don't know if you do that with a guy like, I don't know who their backup would be, Joel Hofer maybe. But the flip side of that is
sideburns.
Yeah, the flip side of that is the Blues do have guys in the wings that, like, if you're trading Ville Husso, you're not turning to a nobody and you're gonna have to be starting Jordan Binnington 85% of the games here on out. They have players that can fill the role that Ville Husso filled. But the flip side of that is it could be a decision that comes back to haunt the St. Louis Blues, especially if Ville Husso, continues his progression and becomes like an elite starting goaltender in the NHL. If you just trade him for like a rental or something like that, it could be a bit of a frustrating move. But I definitely agree that, unless things change, unless for some reason the Blues aren't sold on Jordan Binnington as their long-term starter, that's really the only scenario I could see them sticking with Ville Husso if a good trade came up. But if I'm the St. Louis Blues, I'm not trading him for a rental. I would trade a guy like Ville Husso for a long-term, hopefully fix for this team, a guy like Jacob Chychrun, or another piece that you're not just gonna bank on staying around for this year and that's it. Because like we've been saying, the whole issue is that the Blues got a lot of contracts up in this season, next season, and they got a lot of guys that they're going to have to make decisions on. And yeah, Ville Husso, getting rid of him for a rental would be great this season, but then all of a sudden, you're looking at backup goaltender, a position that a lot of teams have trouble filling. It's like I said, a double-edged sword. I wish it was as simple as like, oh yeah, Ville Husso for Jacob Chychrun, everyone's happy, woohoo. But
one for one, call it a
yeah,
day.
it's not that simple. And it's definitely something that we're gonna see play out pretty surface level here for the Blues moving forward, depending on how much they go to Husso, how much trust they put in him, how well he plays, how well Jordan Binnington plays. It's really like something that wasn't even a question until recently when he started playing as well as he did, that this wasn't even a debate that we've been having. So it's something we're going to have to monitor and stay on top of, because I still don't think it's a guarantee that he's going to be commanding starter minutes and this and that. It's been a good stretch for him, but he could fall back down to earth, like you said, with that inconsistency. So it's something that I think is going to be monitored pretty closely here by fans, by us, by the organization and management and all that, as time moves forward, and they're going to decide what to do there. But speaking of big decisions, I know we got a message on our Facebook page about one of the most surprising players in the St. Louis Blues this season, maybe the most underrated player in the NHL, in Ivan Barbashev, and the unfortunate question mark of his upcoming contract renewal and whether or not it makes sense to trade Ivan Barbashev. Yes, you heard me right.
We're selling high on both of them. Just clean house.
Yeah,
right?
you heard me right. Potential Ivan Barbashev trade? Question mark, exclamation point, clickbait. We're going to be getting into that and more in the second segment, but first I want to tell you guys about BetOnline. If you think Ville Husso is going to get traded, or maybe you think he's going to start for the St. Louis Blues and put up big numbers, put your money where your mouth is and check out betonline.ag. BetOnline would like to wish you a happy new betting year as we continue our march to the playoffs and beyond. BetOnline remains the number one spot For all the best sports wagering action for 2022, new year and a new updated desktop and mobile website to sign up today and receive your 50% welcome bonus on your first deposit. Just use our promo code LOCKEDON to get started. From football, basketball, hockey, boxing, and UFC, right to your favorite Vegas casino games. Don't wait to take advantage of all the amazing offers available for 2022. BetOnline is the fastest and easiest way to wager on all your favorite sports. BetOnline, where the game starts, and we'll be right back. All right, Tommy. So I know I didn't see the message. I know you mentioned it. We got a message on Facebook basically saying, "Hey, Ivan Barbashev, he's been really good," which he has been. We've talked about that a lot. And then the second half of the message got a little spooky, and they said, "Hey, Ivan Barbashev needs a new contract soon, and he is not making a lot of money. This team might not be able to afford him. Do you trade him?" And with that, comes the question of what direction do the Blues want to go? Do they want to fully embrace the youth movement and maybe move on from a guy like David Perron? Or, God forbid, a guy like Ryan O'Reilly, who's also going to have a contract up in the same season. There's definitely a question mark there that, similar to Ville Husso, because of their recent success, all of a sudden these guys that you thought were going to just be, random depth signings are all of a sudden looking like they might command some pretty significant chunks of change. And it might, unfortunately, make sense in a certain scenario, a scenario where the Blues do want to stick with more of their veteran core. And they think maybe Ivan Barbashev's season was a fluke, flash in the pan, where maybe not this year, but maybe in the offseason, next trade deadline, if they're not having too much success, maybe a guy like Ivan Barbashev is a guy you look to move on from before he just walks away for nothing.
Yeah, I think as much as we jest about the idea of, oh yeah, we're gonna trade our top goal scorer right now after he's having a career year and all that, I do think it's a good question because, like you said, his contract is up in 2023. Ryan O'Reilly's contract is up in 2023, and obviously so is Vladimir Tarasenko's. Now, you may be in the group that doesn't think Vladimir Tarasenko is going to re-sign here, but there are some people who think Vladimir Tarasenko would want to re-sign here. So if you're taking all of that into consideration, there's gonna have to be some not so fan friendly moves made to allocate all of that cap, right? Because I think if I checked correctly, Ivan Barbashev is making 2.25 average annual value this year, and as we've seen this season, he should be probably making, I would say, 4 or 5, maybe a little bit more, depending on. I mean, he's entering the prime of his career, so he's probably going to want to ball on probably long term and max money he can, right? So if he's looking for that, and you want to show him that, hey, we appreciate everything you've done for us, we believe in you as not only a bottom 6 guy and a grinder and one of the identities of the St. Louis Blues for the last couple of years, but also the offensive prowess that you've shown this season. We don't think it's a fluke. We want to bring you back. I think that's a good idea for the Blues moving forward with their core as they get younger. He's only 20. He's only 25. I think he'll be 26 when his contract is up. So it's a perfect time to re-sign the guy to a long contract. On the flip side, you've got Ryan O'Reilly, who I think is hovering right around 30. How long do you want to keep him around? Is he worth keeping around as he starts getting over the hill in terms of age? I think his game is going to age amazingly. But if you bring Barbashev back, if you bring him back, I don't know if you have room for Vladimir Tarasenko. And then at the end of this season, you've got David Perron. So that's even earlier. You got to make a decision on David Perron. And as we've talked about on this podcast, he's kind of struggled this season after having a career season last year. So it's like, what do you get there? Like I said, there's going to be some difficult moves that have to be made. I do think it's in the Blues' best interest to build around and with Ivan Barbashev in the fold. So I like you were talking about before we started recording, Josh, I think that's one of the guys that you figure out how to make that happen and then let the chips fall where they may. Especially with, can you imagine a line of Barbashev, Kyrou, and Thomas in the foreseeable future as the main core, like top 6 guys for the St. Louis Blues moving forward? I mean, that's beautiful to me.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's definitely a scenario where like it would make sense for a team to trade a player like Ivan Barbashev at a time like this. A team that's sort of in a different um, a different window per se. But with the way that the Blues have been playing this year and with the way that the youth movement has really taken over, Ivan Barbashev has shown this season that he should be part of that core, that the next wave for the St. Louis Blues. And as good as he's been this season, it's not like he's progressed so much over these last few years that like he's going to command a big, first, second line type player contract. Like as good as he's been this season, it wouldn't surprise me to see, them go out and try to go after like an extension with him this offseason, beginning of next season before, he kind of goes off on another tear next season. Because like I said, as much as he's been good this season, there have been many more seasons where he's kind of carved out who he is as a player, and has been good at other things. And then this offensive explosion has kind of come on as of late. So I don't think it's really going to be, I don't think the Ivan Barbashev contract is going to handcuff the Blues. And like, that's really the only time I think you can justify trading a guy like him, where you got like a significant plan in place and you got one guy that's the odd man out, who's going to request a big contract, and you don't need to justify, paying a guy like that. If the Blues were in a different situation where they had a bunch more young guys that were going to be commanding big contracts, and like I said, Ivan Barbashev was sort of the odd man out, then I could totally see trade him for something else. We've got our core in place for the future. Ivan Barbashev's a little older than what the Blues are doing, blah, 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 blah. But I don't think that's the case right now. I think he's a guy that's proven that he can play anywhere in the lineup, sort of a jack of all trades for the St. Louis Blues. And then this season, the offense, comes on as the cherry on top. But I think he's more valuable than just his offensive game. And I really don't think you can afford to lose that just because he's due for a contract. That's what happens is guys sign a contract, a bridge deal, play really well, and they get paid, and you're going to have to make decisions of which of those guys do you pay and which of those guys do you move on from. And if I'm Doug Armstrong looking at this team, looking at Jordan Kyrou and Robert Thomas and the youth of this roster, and then you're looking at a guy like, I'm not going to say it's going to come down to this, but if let's say theoretically it's between Ivan Barbashev and David Perron. Obviously that's not what's going to happen. It's not that simple. There's a lot more that goes into it. But if I'm looking at this, right, but it could be. If there's a situation where you're saying, okay, 25, 26-year-old Ivan Barbashev who has just started to ascend into his prime, or a guy like David Perron who might make a little less money, towards the end of his prime, the end of his career, but you know what you're going to get out of him. With the way that this roster is made up right now, you go with Ivan Barbashev. It just makes more sense to me. It fits the timeline more, when Jordan Kyrou and Robert Thomas are hitting their primes in, 3-ish more seasons. You're going to want a guy like Ivan Barbashev who is on the tail end of his prime at like 30 years old. And unfortunately not a guy like David Perron who might be retired, by the time that Ivan Barbashev is, making that big money. So it's a tough question. And I think it's similar to the Ville Husso situation where it's so unexpected and like you don't really know what you're getting out of Barbashev long term just yet. Is this a fluke? Is it not? I think it's going to be something that, again, just depends on how he finishes out the year, what he wants to do. And there's a lot more that goes into it behind the scenes. And I think in the third segment, we're going to kind of try to wrap all of this up and come to a sort of consensus on the direction we would like to see the Blues go in. A lot of moving parts. What do you got?
My final thoughts on Ivan Barbashev, and I think that you were kind of touching on this a little bit, but I think in terms of value, what he brings to the team is that identity of a bottom six guy. And he's been a bottom six guy for the majority of his career here with the St. Louis Blues. And this season, he's just turning it on offensively. If you're playing devil's advocate or you're sitting at home, we're talking about a career year for Ivan Barbashev, talking about his ascension and the start of his prime. If you're sitting at home thinking to yourself, there's no way this dude is ever going to score 20 goals again. He's just having a fluke season. It's weird with COVID and pandemic and all this stuff going on right now. He'll fall back to earth next season. I think if you're Doug Armstrong, which I don't know if Doug Armstrong is thinking like that, but if you're Doug Armstrong and you're looking at Ivan Barbashev and saying he's playing out of his mind right now, he's having a fantastic season, I don't think we'll ever see a meteoric rise from this player ever again. Maybe it does make sense not to move him because he's going to handcuff you in terms of salary cap, but to make sure that you maximize the return for him before he does fall back to earth. And I feel like Ville Husso kind of falls into that same conversation, right? Like if you think this is the best that Ville Husso ever has to offer, and at some point he's going to fall back down to the player that got not passed up because he was injured, but the player that struggled in the AHL at times and was a little bit inconsistent, maybe it is the right decision to maximize the return for him when he's playing the hottest. I think that's a question that Doug Armstrong is going to have to ask. The scouts are going to have to ask, and it's definitely got a very difficult answer. So I'm glad I don't have to answer it. But we're just throwing all the thoughts here.
Yeah, this has been a very, like you said, we've thrown out thoughts. It's been a very jumbled episode, tough conversations for sure. And unfortunately, most of the questions have been like, well, I don't know, because it's true. We don't know. The rise of Ivan Barbashev and Ville Husso have been so unexpected that you can't really make a solid statement on what we think the Blues should do moving forward. It's, well, if this happens, then this would make sense. But if this happens, this would make sense. There's so much that goes into it. We're going to do our best to sort of wrap up all these thoughts and try to make it concise. And I don't know. In the third segment of today's episode, so stay tuned for that. We'll be right back. All right, Tommy. Where do we go from here? Well, look, I just want to say final thoughts on the Ivan Barbashev thing. We talk about him. Oh, if he falls back down to earth, blah, 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 blah. Ivan Barbashev falling back down to earth, still a really good player. It's easy to forget that Ivan Barbashev comes to this team, started when he was 20, 21, 22, immediately carved himself out a role in the bottom six and did a really good job of it. That Ivan Barbashev falling back down to earth is a great two-way grinding forward that any team could use. And that being said, he's shown one season where he can produce offensively, and that's not going to command a huge pay raise. So it's like, what's the difference financially in the Ivan Barbashev of last season versus the Ivan Barbashev of this season? It's a couple $1 million. It's not like you're going from his $2.25 million contract to a $10 million deal. He's still a guy that's going to be getting middle six money. So even if he does fall back down to earth, I don't want the Blues to part with the Ivan Barbashev of last year, much less the Ivan Barbashev of this year. So
bottom six Barbashev compared to top six.
Yeah, I don't think it's. I don't know. I don't think it's as simple as we can try to make it in a 20-minute episode. I'll just say that. I think there's going to be a lot of.
Barbashev still worth $4.5 or $5 million?
Yeah. Bottom six Bozak was. At the time, it didn't look like. At the time, it didn't look like it. But it's one of those things where, great, you move on from him. You'd rather not pay Ivan Barbashev $5 million to play in your bottom six. Great. Who the heck are you going to replace him with? Making $1 million and a half less. It's. I don't think the drop off in talent from moving on from a guy like Ivan Barbashev would be worth saving the extra chunk of change. If the Blues are right up against the cap and literally cannot afford to re-sign him, then that's another thing. But, if you're the St. Louis Blues, you're looking at Ivan Barbashev and you're looking at his age, you got to make some things happen to be able to fit a guy like that into your fold moving forward. And I think and I hope that the Blues will, especially, with his chemistry with Buchnevich and all of that. But I don't know. It's it's definitely up in the air for sure what's going to happen. Trying to concisely wrap this one up. We got about a minute or so left before.
So I've got a question.
Yeah, here we go.
For the folks at home to simmer on. Okay, so we always talk about building up and loading up for the Stanley Cup, right? And going on a cup run, and that's the whole reason why people make trades at the deadline for rentals, is because they want to build up for the cup run and then just dump them afterwards, right? So I think when you took a look at the two guys that we've been talking about on this episode, Barbashev, obviously you are 1,000% better off to make a run through the Stanley Cup with him on your team than without him. So even if the Blues do end up trading him, like I said, I don't think that's going to happen. I think he's going to sign a long contract with some money to boot and be a part of that next core because he's at the right age for it and he's entering the prime of his career. That being said, take a guy like Ville Husso, right? And if you've seen my tweets, you probably already know my thoughts on where I think Ville Husso's at in terms of a goaltender. But I don't know if I ever see him being a starter. And I think he'd make a great backup because if he just comes in for 20 games or 30 games or whatever it might be a season, and plays solid. And he's just kind of shown that he's streaky, right? And so for me, the question comes down to, and maybe it's not this simple, but if you have Ville Husso, right? How much does he move the needle for you to win a Stanley Cup?
Yeah.
Right? Because like if you think that Ville Husso is capable of taking this team on a Jordan Binnington like run through 16 games, setting records left and right, posting like a 9.45 save percentage or something ridiculous, by all means, keep him around and he'll lead us to a Stanley Cup and we'll go marching down Main Street again. But I don't have that faith, so I think I would be comfortable with moving Ville Husso, moving Chucky Sideburns in as a serviceable backup. He doesn't have to be a world beater. It doesn't have to be a 1A, 1B type scenario. We can move Chucky Sideburns in as the backup, as a solidified backup, lean on Jordan Binnington, but go out and get a defenseman, because I think that moves the needle a lot more than Ville Husso does in one way or another.
Yeah, that's sort of my takeaway is like, I think if you're going to move on to Ville Husso, like it does make sense. You got a guy like in Jordan Binnington who, even if he's playing worse than Ville Husso right now, you've seen more consistency out of him. You know what you're going to get. You can be confident going into, next season, the season after that, the season after that with Jordan Binnington as your starter, unless he has as meteoric of a fall as he did a rise, which I would be shocked. Knock on wood.
Same.
So
it's a fun fact about Jordan Binnington. He hasn't, in his career, he hasn't posted a season below a 900 save percentage since 2010, 2011, I believe, in the OHL. So
yeah,
that's
so
kind of cool.
Consistent for sure. It's brought up a lot of good, sort of like what's the word I'm looking for? Like began to follow a lot of different threads that are slowly poking out of the woodworks here. It was like 15 different analogies I just combined, but whatever. It's
unraveling threads.
Yeah, there you go. Thank you. Starting to follow 2 or 3 different threads that just have slowly begun to unravel, and like we have no idea what the the big picture looks like. And those are decisions that have to be made with a hockey team. It's guys, do you stick with this guy, do you move on from this guy, whatever. Not going to have the answers yet. I think the rest of the season is going to be huge. The playoff run, hopefully, unless they get bounced in 4 or 5 games again, will be huge as well for determining what direction the Blues go in. But it's a good problem to have. Be like, do you go with this really good player or do you go with this really good player?
Maybe it's as simple as, if you can get a D-man, get him and move Ville. If you can't, keep Ville, because you're going to need
that's
him.
That's my outlook. If you get someone that you think can actually help this team, not just this season, but kind of mesh with your core moving forward, I think you do it. But I don't know. I'm sure we're going to be having these conversations a lot more this week, next month, next year, because it is an ongoing challenge for the St. Louis Blues, fitting all these guys into their rosters. But it's fun being able to talk about it. That's for sure. Fun being able to speculate. So want to thank everybody out there so much for listening to today's episode. Make sure you hit that follow or subscribe button on whatever podcast platform you're listening to us on. That way, you get notified whenever we upload a new episode. Plus, subscribe to us on YouTube. Hit that notification bell. That way you can watch us live and watch my dad walk in and steal the blanket from under my butt while I'm in the middle of recording, and me not miss a beat because I'm an amazing professional at what I do.
I was just about to say that, professional.
You can only watch moments like that on our YouTube. So make sure you subscribe to us there. We just recently passed 100 subscribers, which is awesome. Make sure you follow us on all of our socials: Instagram, Twitter, TikTok, and Facebook at Locked On Blues. Follow me on Twitter at Josh Hyman NHL. Follow Tommy on Twitter at TWelcher15. Thanks so much for listening, and as always, let's go Blues.